Don't ever trust people that are helpful, which is so mean, but so true. Just don't do it. Hi, I'm Chansey.
And I'm Lila.
And this is for Criming Out Loud.
Did you guys hear about, I'm sure you did, everybody heard about the Yellowstone explosion? That's crazy. I got up this morning and I was like reading the article about it a little bit more, and I was just like, wow, crazy. For those of you that haven't heard, Biscuit Basin, it's like a weird, it looks like a mud pool. I don't even know. It had like they called it like a hydrothermal explosion, which I don't know what that means, but basically like it like shot up debris and like water question mark with other stuff, I guess, like hundreds of feet into the air, and like destroyed the boardwalk around it and whatever. And apparently it didn't hurt anybody though. So yeah,
That's good,
crazy.
I guess.
Can you imagine being at Yellowstone, like just doing your thing? For those of you that live out, on the west side of the United States, and then just all of a sudden you're just like, wow, cool pictures, and it's like in your face. Yeah, that would be scary.
I don't know if that's a thing that other people grew up fearing, but I feel like I was constantly like reminded by adults that like Yellowstone could blow up at any second and we'd all just turn into ash and die.
Yeah, I definitely remember like being terrified that I was like, when's it gonna happen? When is it gonna
any
happen?
second. And it's gonna be
And
like
I hope that I'm the one that's vaporized. That's that close.
Yeah. I always heard adults say things like, I hope that I live really close to it when it blows up so that I don't have to suffocate in the ash. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not great. I also read a book when I was a kid where this teenager decides to throw a fit and he doesn't go on a family vacation. And while he's alone in his house, Yellowstone blows up and he has to trek across the country in the middle of an apocalypse because of Yellowstone blowing up. And he has to find his family. So that was traumatizing too as a kid.
That's intense.
It's like, I'm going to just end up alone.
Well, like the good news is that they said that like this did not happen from like any seismic or volcanic activity. So apparently it's like unrelated to like Yellowstone blowing up.
That's good to know, because I thought it was like the volcano was on the move and so it was blowing up. But that's good.
Nope.
I like that.
They said that they determined it wasn't. So if we are going to be blown up, we might have a little bit longer before we experience that.
Cool. In the meantime, there's always the tornadoes. So yeah, apparently it's like a really bad tornado season.
Live out in the Midwest. Tornado Alley. We just both went and saw Twister separate times. But it's a crazy movie, and it made me so grateful that I don't live in a place where I could be eaten by a tornado.
Seriously. And I don't even know if that's really how tornadoes work. I have no idea how accurate that movie was, or based on science or whatever. But it took my mild terror and turned it into like a full-blown fear. It's a phobia now. So, yay.
Yeah, I mean, it was intense. I mean, not like crazy intense, but pretty intense. I was like, gee, I don't want to get sucked up into a volcano. I don't want to get sucked up into a volcano. A tornado. And yeah, no, it was a decent movie. It was good.
I liked it. But speaking of entertainment, that's what we are. We're here to talk about part 2 of the Zodiac Killer case. Last week, we talked about part 1. So before you listen to this episode, you should most definitely go listen to last week's episode, or else you'll be lost and nothing will make sense. So goodbye to all of you who are not here for the right reasons. You've been banished from
part 2 until you have heard part 1.
Literally. I mean, you could listen to them backwards, but I just don't understand that. But you're welcome to do whatever you'd like. Anyways, so I'm just going to recap a little bit what we talked about last week just to remind everybody, and then we can jump into the last few murders and kind of the theories and stuff when it comes to the Zodiac. So last week we talked about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, who may or may not have been a victim of the Zodiac Killer, but who's kind of listed in his potential victims. And then we also talked about the attacks on 3 sets of couples. The first couple was Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. They were left in that shack on the beach of a lake in Gaviota State Park. And then the second couple that was attacked was Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. They were out for their first date 5 days before Christmas when they were attacked, and David survived, but Betty Lou wasn't that lucky. We also talked about the attack of Darlene Ferrin and Matthew Majot, and Matthew survived, but Darlene died. So the next set of attacks is also on couples. So here we go. So a couple months after the murders in Vallejo and the Zodiac's debut letters, he struck again. On September 27th, 1969, 2 college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, were out relaxing on the shores of Lake Berryessa when all of a sudden a man appeared out of the foliage and he was holding a gun. So immediately right off the bat, this couple is like, oh great, this is wonderful.
Shoot.
And this man was wearing what appeared to be like a homemade costume of some kind with like an executioner style hood that had like clip-on sunglasses over the eye holes of this hood thingy. And he was wearing some sort of bib-like thing on the chest of this costume that had a circle with a cross stitched through it.
So he looked like
that's
a
what
doofus.
He was wearing. Yeah, basically. Probably.
Was it supposed to like inspire terror? He probably just looked so stupid.
Yeah. I think that if he hadn't had a gun, they probably would have been like, what is happening? What are you doing?
You're so weird. What's going on?
Who's this weirdo? So, unfortunately, he was holding a gun, so the couple was like, okay. He told the couple that he had just escaped from prison and that he'd killed a guard and stolen a car, and he was on his way to Mexico. And he said that he needed money and that he needed a car so that he could get to Mexico and escape the people that were chasing him. And at this point, they had no reason to not believe him. So they were like, okay. And the man pulled out pre-cut pieces of plastic clothesline and told Cecilia to tie up Brian's wrists, and then he tied her wrists once she was done. So the killer then checked Brian's bonds to see if they were tight enough, and they weren't because Cecilia had purposely tied them loosely. Who wouldn't do that?
Smart girl. Yeah.
Smarty. And at first, Brian thought that it was just a robbery. Like, this guy just was going to steal from them and then leave them there and take their car and take their money and whatever and just go. But then the man drew a knife out and started stabbing them. Over and over again. So there was another stabbing case linked to the Zodiac. Brian was stabbed 6 times and Cecilia was stabbed 10 times.
Oh my gosh.
The killer, after he was finished attacking them, he went up to the road and drew that same symbol that was on his like little bib thing on his chest, the circle with the cross through it. So he drew that symbol on the car with a marker, and then he wrote this. He wrote Vallejo 12-20-68, and then underneath that he wrote 7-4-69, and then underneath that he wrote September 27-69 6:30, by knife. So it appeared that they were corresponding dates to the previous 3 murders. Like, the Vallejo murders happened 5 days before Christmas in 68. They seem to correspond, these dates, with the murders of the Zodiac that the Zodiac had claimed. And so he was like making a list, I guess, of his previous crimes. I don't know why. Maybe it was like his way of claiming the murders. I don't know.
Yeah, probably. Probably just be like, it's me
But
again. Hee hee hee.
ah, ha
I'm a
ha
dumb
ha ha.
butt.
So at 7:40, after he'd drawn on the car and written all this stuff and whatever, he left them there. He left Cecilia and Brian there, and he went to a payphone at a car wash in Napa, about 25 minutes away from the scene of the crime, and he called the sheriff's department. And he said he wanted to report a murder. No, a double murder. And then he like confessed to the crime. So for some reason, he enjoys like calling the police and just telling them, "Oh, look what I did," and then running away. I don't know.
I just don't like
But
understand his mentality. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
I don't
You know
get
what
it
I mean?
either.
I'm
Why would
just
you like risk getting caught? I don't get it.
like, why do you want to? Yeah, why do you want to get caught? I mean, he's leaving like all these clues. He's claiming these murders. He's like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me. I loved that. I think that's why serial killers become so fascinating to people, especially ones like this, is because it's like, why? What is going on in your mind that makes it like, is it just fun to you? Like your life doesn't matter to you, so like you get caught or not, whatever. It's just like, let's see how long you can feel superior. I don't know. It's interesting to consider the
Well,
mindset.
yeah, and I think a part of it is like it's like narcissism. Like I
Yeah.
think this guy truly believed he was smarter than the police, and so he wasn't going to get caught. Like I think that he enjoyed taunting the police and stuff or whatever, but I think like his biggest thing was like I'm not going to get caught. And he was proved right time and time again, and so I feel like it probably just like continued to like feed his narcissism. And he started doing stuff that was just like dumb. Unfortunately, it didn't really help police, but anyways, so back to Brian and Cecilia. The couple was found by a man and his son who were fishing nearby because they heard the victim screaming for help. So again, they were both alive. And when police arrived on the scene, he
That's
again
nuts.
didn't make sure that they were dead. He just walked away after he attacked them. So confused by that. But Cecilia was conscious when police arrived, so she was able to like Brian was not. She was able to like tell them a little bit about what happened, but once she got into the ambulance on the way to the hospital, she lapsed into a coma and she never woke up. But Brian
Dang.
actually survived and was able to tell the story to police and to the press.
Do you think that's somehow
So
intentional that all the dudes seem to survive and the women seem to have more intense injuries?
I've thought about that, but at the same time, they're not like, I don't know.
He stabbed
I
like
don't know.
her like several more times than he stabbed him.
Yeah, he stabbed her 2 more times than he stabbed Brian.
But it might just be
So
luck.
I don't
I don't
know.
know.
It just seems odd. It does seem odd that it like none of the women survived and 2 of his male victims did. I don't know. I don't know if it was intentional or not.
Hmm.
I don't think it was.
I'm
I
sure it
think
was
he
just
just
happenstance.
I think it's part of that narcissism thing again. Like he just assumed that he would just kill them because like they would be dead because he wanted them to be dead. Like he was superior at all things, including killing people, and so of course they'd be dead. That doesn't make any sense to me, but maybe it does to him. I have no idea. Anyways,
Yeah.
so at least thankfully Brian survived and they were again able to get like a description ish, but really all Brian could say was like white guy, average build, average height. Like there was just nothing because he'd worn that hood thing with the glasses attached. I don't know. So he couldn't really give a good description of him. So 2 weeks later, on October 11th, 1969, Paul Stein was a 28-year-old cab driver in San Francisco. He picked up a white man who was headed for an upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. And
This would
when
be
they
my
arrived,
worst nightmare.
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
truly.
as if I was ever a cab driver, let me rephrase that. I ain't never gonna be a cab driver. You do not know who is getting into your freaking car. No.
You really don't. You really don't. And this guy really didn't know who he was picking up. They got to the intersection that this passenger had asked him to go to, and they actually drove like a block past where they were supposed to because the passenger had requested it, and they drove into this like darker obscured area. And at this point, at like 9:55 p.m., the man shot Stein in the head with a handgun and basically killed him immediately. Like he was dead just like
At
that.
least there was no terror and suffering. But still, okay.
Yep. Ridiculous. So the Zodiac took Stein's wallet and car keys and a piece of Stein's bloodied shirt. And then he
Yuck.
left. Yeah. And this murder was different than the other ones because it was done in like a residential neighborhood in just open space where anybody could see. It seemed like the
What time of
Zodiac
day
had
was
not
this? Was
put
this night?
it was like 9:55, but it was also September, so it wasn't like super dark. Like it was dark, but it wasn't like midnight or anything. And
Okay.
there were actually three teenagers across the street who saw the whole thing happen, and they phoned the San Francisco Police Department while the crime was happening. Like while he was there, they called him. And they gave a description of the man because they saw him with their eyes. And they described him as a husky white man wearing a dark black jacket. And the dispatcher thought, and this is, we won't get super into this, but racism is a real thing, y'all. The dispatcher mistakenly believed that the teenagers were saying that the man was black.
Huh?
And so I don't know how that, he said a husky white man wearing a darker black jacket. I don't know how that translates into it being a black man, but okay, cool. So the witnesses also said that they saw the killer wipe down the cab and like rifle through the man's clothing, is what they said. And that he was like leaned on the inside of the cab cleaning it up, and that he could potentially have like left partial prints somewhere because he was like touching the cab still. So
Hmm.
when police came to the car, they actually did find like two partial prints that they thought maybe his, like
Wow.
on the driver's door, but they don't know for sure that they're his. It's just like potentially. And at this point, obviously there are patrol officers responding to the dispatch call, and they're like 2 blocks away from the crime scene. When they got there, like 2 minutes later, after the phone call was placed, they observed a white man in dark clothes walking away from the crime scene towards like a nearby army base. And this man was probably the Zodiac killer.
They didn't do anything. They were just like, hey, that's a dude. Fits the description.
They
Bye now.
not only did they not do anything, they spoke to this man. They pulled up with their car alongside the man, and they asked him if he had seen anything suspicious in the area. And he responded that he had seen a man waving a gun around earlier, and that he'd gone east instead of the direction that he was headed. And so the police drove away, and they were like, cool, because they thought that the man was black who they were trying to find
Yeah,
and not
that's what
white.
I figured was the case. Oh my
So yeah,
gosh.
those police officers
Wow.
literally could have had him.
They
And
talked to him.
they talked to him, and I don't know, I just don't know how much racism factored into that, but it seems like it was probably a pretty big factor. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, this is the last known murder of the Zodiac Killer. This is his last one. And out of the blue, they seem to just stop. And he seemed to instead focus more on taunting the police and the media and trying to like spread fear. He's a fear monger and everywhere. So at this point, letters started to like pour in to local newspapers. And he seemed to focus most of his letters on the San Francisco Chronicle. So he sent like a total of 3 more letters to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. And all of these letters were just him, like, more ciphers, him ranting about stuff. And in 2 of these letters, he sent pieces of, like, parts of the shirt that he'd taken in the letter to confirm that it was actually him that was sending the letters, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
like, he sent the letter. There was, like, one of them had, like, a funny greeting card in it, and then a new cipher, and then, like, just a piece of the bloody shirt from Paul Stein's murder. And then he did that again, where he gave, like, another little bit of that shirt. And it was, like, I guess his way of, like, avoiding copycats or whatever, or, like, proving to police that he was the actual killer. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the thing that I don't understand is that, like, literally all of these letters were published by the newspapers. I feel like at a certain point you'd just you'd stop printing them. You'd stop. But they also got a little bit scarier because he started threatening, like, bombs and stuff instead of just, like,
Yeah.
shooting random people. So there was, like, a 7-page letter that he sent in November of 1969 to the Chronicle, where he claimed that police had stopped him near a crime scene but let him go. So I guess there's the confirmation we needed on that. And he also included a recipe to make a bomb and a diagram of an explosive he wanted to use. And then another weird letter that was sent that they attribute to the Zodiac was in December of 1969, like a couple months after that 7-page letter with the bomb recipe in it. He
Yeah.
sent a letter to Melvin Bell, who was like a lawyer or something, and he said, quote, "Please help me. I cannot remain in control for much longer," end quote, and was basically begging Bell to stop him from killing again. He was like a district attorney or something. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm reading that letter and it's like crazy because he says like at the moment the children are safe from the bomb because it is so massive to dig. It's really intense.
Yeah. It almost just seems like he loses it. I don't know. He just kind of like
It's
spirals
either really
somewhere
like
weird.
calculating and just trying to mess with people or he's like straight up lost his mind.
Lost his literal mind. So then something kind of this is another like possible but not confirmed instance. It's not a murder, but just like something weird that happens in Modesto, California. So there was a woman named Kathleen Johns, and she packed her infant daughter into her car in March of 1970. So this is like 3 months after his last letter that was like begging the district attorney to stop him from killing. So 3 months later, Kathleen is like on the road to go visit her sick mother who lives in Petaluma in North California. And so Kathleen was 7 months pregnant and she had a baby in the back seat and she's driving to go see her sick mom. And all of a sudden, a car pulls up alongside her on Highway 132 and they're like signaling that she needs to pull over, like something's wrong with her vehicle. And so she pulls over. And the other driver also pulls over. And the driver tells her that her back wheel is loose and that he wanted to help. And
Yeah, is it?
I guess 1970 was just like a different world because if somebody did that to me, I'd be in my car speeding away so fast.
I would not have pulled over to begin with.
Oh no. No, no, no. If I was going to pull over, I'd go pull over like in a public gas station or something. if I really felt something was wrong. But Kathleen lived in 1970, not in 2024. So she was like, okay. She took up his offer of help and he started like working on her wheel. And instead of actually helping, this man actually loosened the lug nuts on the car. She didn't know that. So he told her like it should be good, go ahead. Like you should be good to go. And so she starts driving and the wheel falls off because he hadn't actually tried to help. So she was like, "Oh no, I don't know what to do." And he's like, "You know what? I'll give you a ride to
Oh my
like a gas
gosh.
station or something." Don't ever trust people that are helpful, which is so mean but so true. Just don't do it. So she got into his car with her infant daughter and they started driving. And at this point, she started realizing that maybe he had plans other than driving her to a gas station to get help. He just started driving around and talking to her, and he started making veiled threats to hurt her child. And so she, like the power mama she was, she grabbed her daughter and she jumped out of the moving vehicle. She was like, "Not today. Not today." She's
Dang.
7 months pregnant. She's like, not having it. So at this point, she's just like on the road by herself, pregnant with her little baby daughter. And another random passing car stops and picks her up, which is great. It turns out they help her.
And like nobody was
I would be
injured? Like
like,
she didn't hurt
no,
her infant or anything?
nope, she was fine. I don't know, man. Crazy. So at this point, she like tells this person to just drive her to a police department because she's gonna turn this guy in. So she goes to police. I forgot to mention this earlier, but they after Paul Stein was killed, they did a sketch based on the kids who witnessed this man. They did a sketch based off that description, and so they compared that, and it. She said that they were the same person. She thought it was the Zodiac. But if you look at a picture of the Zodiac sketch, it could literally be anybody. I'm just gonna put that out there. He just looks like an average Joe with glasses. I don't know. But she was like pretty adamant that it had been the Zodiac. So later, there was like months later, another letter that the Zodiac sent mentioned what he called, quote unquote, an interesting ride that he had with a woman and her baby. So police think that Kathleen was this woman and her child, and that's why, like, she's linked to this potentially. So just weird stuff. I don't know what his plan was there, but weird and super
Well,
traumatizing.
it's very possible he was gonna kill them. So
Yeah. It almost like it almost seemed like he wasn't sure about it. Because if he was sure about it, he could have just like killed her, killed them. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like he didn't hesitate with any of these other victims. Didn't hesitate at all.
Why was he playing with her?
Yeah, it just seems weird. So after this, basically all of the Zodiac stuff just became like letters. He basically disappeared. There weren't any other like murders or anything, or like attempted murders or kidnappings or anything. And in April, like a month after this encounter with Kathleen and her baby, there he sent a letter to the Chronicle with another cipher and with another bomb diagram, and he said that he had designed a bomb to kill children on a school bus. Basically, like mass panic ensued. Parents were like, "I am not sending my child on a bus ever again." And there were police escorts for buses in some areas. Like it was just chaos. And then nothing happened. Like nothing came of that. There were no bombs or attempted bombings or anything. They never saw anything like that. And then in April, like a week after that bus bombing threat, he sent a greeting card to the Chronicle, which I don't get. He does that frequently, but he demanded that the Chronicle publish his bomb threats and insisted that people wear Zodiac buttons featuring his symbol.
Oh, shut up. We
This
all
guy is
hate you.
straight up bananas.
You are a
He's the
pile
worst.
of poop. Go die in a hole.
Steaming gorilla dung, my sir. You are freaking psycho. So obviously nobody starts wearing Zodiac buttons. So he sends another letter like 2 months later where he complains that nobody's wearing the buttons that he wants them to wear.
Yeah, dude, it sucks, doesn't it? Your life is terrible.
I just can't take this guy. Like, serious, these letters are so dumb. Like, nobody's gonna wear Zodiac buttons. What are you gonna do about that, sir? You can't kill everybody in San Francisco. It's just not gonna happen. So in July of 1970, like a month after this letter where he's whining about nobody wearing his buttons, oh poor Zodiac, he sends a 5-page letter, and he describes in this letter how he tortured his victims, and then explained like more about some of his ciphers that he'd sent and some codes and stuff. And it's weird because none of his victims were tortured, so I'm not really sure what he's referencing. I looked at the letter and it just kind of seems rambly and weird. So I don't know. And basically all through 1970 and into 1971, he's just sending these random letters. One of them's like the typical serial killer message that I was talking about at the beginning of the show, where he cut like individual letters out of magazines and pasted them together to create a message. And one of them was a Halloween card with like the same ranty stuff. And one of them was a letter to the LA Times where he talked about other murders that he was committing and that he'd killed at least 37 people.
So I have a question. I'm like looking at these letters, and I've noticed a few times that he mentions like collecting slaves.
Yes, he
Do you know
does
anything
say
about
that. Other than the fact that he mentions it like a million times in his letters, nobody knows what he's talking about.
Like he's killing people. He's not. He doesn't have slaves. He's
The
killing
only thing I
people.
can think of is that like there have been other serial killers that have talked about like the people they kill become their slaves in the afterlife. So I don't know if that's what he's like talking about, because there have been other serial killers that had that same mentality, that have said like thought similar things or said similar things. So I don't know if maybe that's what he meant. But he doesn't specify. He just mentions it. He doesn't say anything about what that means. So at this point, obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the police investigation. Like I said, like these cases, they weren't linked until the Zodiac started claiming these murders in like 1969 and 1970. So at this point, they've linked all of these murders together and they're trying to kind of figure out who the Zodiac is. And one of their leads takes them to Albany, New York, which is like so random. And I couldn't figure out why on earth they went to Albany, New York. But this was quite a bit after their last letter from the Zodiac. And they basically, like, the Zodiac was just off the map. They had no idea where he was. He'd stopped communicating with police. People were like assuming he was dead or something because he just like cold turkey stopped. And they went to Albany, New York to kind of investigate this lead that I can't figure out what it was. And while police were investigating there, the Albany Times Union newspaper got a letter with the Zodiac symbol on it. And the letter said, "You are wrong. I'm not dead or in the hospital. I'm alive and well, and I'm going to start killing again. Below is the name and location of my next victim, but you had better hurry because I'm going to kill her August 10th at 5 p.m. when the shift change. Albany is a nice town." So, yeah. Below that message,
What?
there were like 3 rows of symbols, and the FBI cryptanalyst deciphered the message, and it basically just said, "Albany Medical Center, this is only the beginning." Investigators literally couldn't figure out what was going on with this letter. They couldn't figure out the victim like that he was referring to. They had no idea. There was no deaths that they could like attribute to him on August 10th. So they just couldn't figure out what was happening. And they have no idea if that was actually the Zodiac or not that sent the letter. It could have been a copycat. It could have been anybody.
Yeah,
So
honestly.
I don't know. I still don't understand why they were in New York at all, but maybe they thought he moved or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. And it's weird that, like, it is weird that they'd be addressed. Like, that he would have been aware that they went there.
Yeah, super weird.
Or that anybody
And
would have known that those were detectives that were there on behalf of, like, that case. You know what I mean? That is weird.
yeah, exactly. So then in 1974, like 3 years later, there are like four more letters. And they're just like, to me, they're different than the previous ones. They seem like much more rambly and weird. Like one of the letters, he's talking about the Symbionese Liberation Army and just like ranting about just weird stuff that he's never mentioned before. And in one letter, he signs it the Red Phantom instead of the Zodiac. Just like weird stuff that makes me like
Yeah,
wonder if these letters were his or not. But
right.
if you look at the handwriting, I don't know how consistent it is across the board. I have no idea. I don't know how easy it is to try and copy somebody's handwriting. I have literally not a clue. But
Right.
it's just like, it seems like he was devolving somehow. And so basically, like, police only ever put forward one suspect as the Zodiac. There were a bunch of people that web sleuths and like book writers and random people just like put forward as potentially being the Zodiac, but there was only one name that the police ever like actually put forward as an actual suspect. So I'm just going to talk about that guy cuz if you're interested in what other people think, you can go check it out. I'm just going to talk about the one suspect police actually think could have been the Zodiac. In a 2007 article, the Guardian wrote that police had interviewed over 2,500 people as potential suspects for the Zodiac, and that literally only half a dozen of them were credible. So out of 2,500 people, they'd only found six that were even close
Yeah.
to being potentially credible, like suspects.
Just because
And
it's like
the
you said,
only,
it's like there's too many people fitting that description.
yeah, it's just too average, too regular. And the only person they ever named was Arthur Lee Allen, who was a former elementary school teacher and also a convicted sex offender. So
Oh,
Allen always denied that he was involved in the Zodiac stuff, and everything that the police had on him was circumstantial at best. But Allen lived in Vallejo, like minutes away from where the Vallejo murders took place. And he'd been fired from his job in 1968 because there had been some allegations of sexual misconduct with his students at the
gross.
elementary school.
Yeah, that's really
And
gross.
people said, quote, that he was fixated with young children and angry at women, end quote. So that's not great.
Yeah, he's
Super
not doing
gross
himself any
guy.
favors. Even if he's not the Zodiac, he's just not a great dude.
Yeah. So Allen was interviewed by police on October 6th back in 1969 by police in the Vallejo Police Department. Allen, there were just some weird things. Like he'd been reportedly seen in the Lake Berryessa area on the day that those murders happened or that attack happened. And there were witnesses that saw somebody fitting Allen's description in that area. But Allen said that he was scuba diving in a completely different place that day. And police couldn't actually confirm who was telling the truth because there was no,
Convenient.
yeah. So that's weird. And in 1971, so right around like the time that the murders have stopped and now it's just like letters, this Allen's friend and neighbor, a man named Donald Cheney, reported to police in Manhattan Beach that Allen had told him that he wanted to kill people and that he'd said the term Zodiac multiple times and that he'd put a flashlight on a gun and had talked about needing visibility at night. So this Cheney neighbor was like, weird stuff happening with my dude, Allen. And he called police.
You're telling me that he was just like telling his neighbor this? It was just like casual, like going to get the newspaper in the morning. Hey, neighbor, what's up? By the way, I really want to kill people. Sorry.
Apparently.
Like, in what context do you even say that to somebody?
I don't know.
I don't understand.
But it's also not that rare because people do that. Like, other killers have done stuff like that where they just say random things like that to people, like coworkers and friends and stuff. I actually specifically remember that Jeffrey Dahmer did that. And people got very uncomfortable because he would just talk about killing people.
There needs to be a way to arrest somebody that's thinking about killing people.
I know.
Because it's not normal. I would never walk up to somebody and be like, hey, I'm really in the mood. I want to kill a person. Because that has never crossed my mind.
Ever. And not only is that like just social boundaries being crossed left and right by saying something like that, it's also like nobody actually thinks stuff like that. Nobody feels like they're just going to go out and have a good murder and then come home and watch TV. That's not how people think. And so you're right. Those are dangerous people. People that say stuff like that, there should be a system for reporting them. And I mean, Cheney reported him and police interviewed him again after this call. And they even got like a search warrant for his home, but they didn't find anything. And in 1974, like 3 years after he'd been called out by his friend to police, he was arrested for lewdness with a 9-year-old boy and pled guilty.
Yeah.
So
gross.
Literally disgusting. This man is not a good man at all. Do I know if he's the Zodiac Killer? I think he's probably not. But he's definitely a gross human. I don't. We'll talk about it. Like, I'm going to get to it right now. But I don't. It's up in the air for me. It could be. It could be him. But I also don't know if it is or not. So he, after this arrest for child nastiness, he was given basically he was sent to a state hospital to be evaluated and treated. He was not sent to prison. So he was there for 3 years, and then he was given a suspended prison sentence instead of actual jail time. And he had 5 years of felony probation, which he completed in 1982 without any problems.
Okay.
In 1991, like almost 10 years later, police are still fixated on him as the Zodiac suspect. They search his home again, and literally nothing. They don't have any evidence. There's nothing there. Nothing.
Okay.
I don't know. Then, in 1992, Allen dies, just of natural causes.
So how old was he when he died?
He was 58 when he died. So, like, not super old, but clearly probably not taking great care of himself, so it's all good. Literally 2 days after Allen died, police served another warrant, and they seized property from his home. So he'd been dead for 2 days, and they were like, we're getting in there. And again, they didn't find any evidence. Like, there was nothing really, like, physically linking him to the Zodiac stuff. And in, like, the early 2000s, there was, like, a movie made called Zodiac that had Robert Downey Jr. and Mark Ruffalo and Jake Gyllenhaal in it. It was, like, a lot of big names.
2007, right?
Yes. And there was, like, Mark Ruffalo was talking to one of the investigators, trying to, like, get into character, you know? And one of the investigators told him, quote, "As soon as that guy walked in the door, I knew it was him," end quote, talking about Alan. And he told Mark Ruffalo that there was like no evidence, but that he knew it was him. And that's the thing. There's no solid evidence. It's great if you have a gut feeling, but there's just nothing actually linking anybody to this Zodiac person, and
Yeah,
especially not
and
Alan.
sadly, those, like, gut feelings, they're not, like, always true. Like, there have been times that people have those gut feelings, and people are actually just straight up innocent.
Yeah, I mean, it's happened over and over again with really popular cases, like the Memphis 3. I'm not sure anybody listening knows what I'm talking about, but like three random people that had nothing to do with crimes that were committed were arrested and put in jail for like 25 years. It happens all the time. And
Yeah.
not that like I don't think that this investigator, like I don't know the whole situation. I wasn't part of the investigation, so maybe he's right. But without any of that proof, like I can't just say that this guy did it. I don't know. And police like were given, there was a police officer, he was a handwriting expert, and he was given like boxes and boxes full of written stuff from Alan, and he had to compare it to the Zodiac letters. That was his job. And he said that literally none of the stuff that Alan's wrote came close to the Zodiac stuff, like handwriting wise. And he didn't believe that Alan was the Zodiac killer. And eventually, when DNA became a thing, they extracted DNA from the envelopes that the Zodiac letters came in, because you have to lick the envelope
Right.
to get it to seal.
Smart.
So they extracted DNA from that and they compared it to Alan's DNA, and it wasn't a match. They only got a partial profile, but it still wasn't a match. So that to me is like, I
Hmm.
don't know. Well, partial profiles aren't great. There's always a chance that it could still be him, I guess, but the DNA isn't providing the evidence that they want. In 1992, one of the surviving victims, Michael, he identified Alan as the man who shot him in 1969 from a photo lineup. So he saw a picture of Alan and he said, "That's the guy that tried to kill me." The witness who was there also said, like when Michael was doing the photo lineup thing, he said that Michael also said that Alan was like 100 pounds heavier than the guy that like shot him. And the dispatcher who got the call after Michael had been shot said that the voices didn't sound right either. So it's just like a weird, like, there's just a lot of contradicting stuff here. Michael said that guy tried to kill me. The dispatcher's like, their voices don't sound anything alike, doesn't sound like the recording that we have. It's just like, there's just a lot of conflict. And then there were things like, for instance, that letter, the Bates from Sherry Jo Bates's case, the one that said Bates had to die, there will be more, whatever, that doesn't seem to match up with the Zodiac's other stuff. That note, the first one, had been typed, and it was typed on a Royal typewriter with Elite type. And they found that same typewriter in Alan's home. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, how many people owned that kind of typewriter at that time? Was it just Alan? How many more were like in circulation? I don't know. Probably a lot. Typewriters were kind of a household thing. You just had them. They also suspected Alan because they found a Zodiac Seawolf wristwatch that had the same logo as the Zodiac Killer letters. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what kind of, like, maybe that's how he chose his symbol. Maybe Alan was like, let me look at my watch. It's Zodiac and it has that symbol, so I'm going to use it. I don't know. It could be a thing. It just seems like, at most, that's just like pondering,
Yeah.
musing. That's not evidence. Like it's an interesting connection if he did turn out to be the Zodiac killer, but it's not proof. And the other
Yeah.
thing that they thought was interesting was that the Zodiac, he left boot prints at a few of the scenes, and he had a size 10 and a half shoe, and so did Alan. So they were like, well, they have the same shoe size. I feel like 10 and a half is a pretty average shoe size
Yeah, it
for
really
men.
is.
So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. But police also looked into other like serial killer suspects. They looked into Charles Manson and Ted Bundy and Ted Kaczynski and other people in the area around that time who had like the same kind of kill for thrill MO, and none of them like panned out. So basically, despite police efforts and efforts of countless web sleuths and reporters and literally just the general public trying to figure out who the Zodiac was, he's never been identified. And some people think that he died in the 70s and that that's why kind of the letter stopped and the murder stopped. Some people think he's in a hospital somewhere. He was arrested for something else. Some people think he just got sick of playing the game and he didn't want to get caught. I don't know what I think. I don't know. But it seems to me like he was having too much fun to just like quit cold turkey randomly. It
Well, it
seems odd
seems
to
like
me.
he was like escalating at the very least. You know, like he
Yeah.
was ramping up to make a more dramatic scene than just like killing a couple people at a time. You know, he's bomb threatening like with kids, and it seems like he picks up a mother with like an infant, which is like way more intense of something to do than murder people. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I see why like police would have liked Alan as a suspect because I feel like there's interesting connections there. Like he does like match the description, but once again that could be many many people. But he matched the description. He's a creep already. It's weird because why does like the Zodiac like all of a sudden turn his attention towards kids? And isn't that like about the same time that that guy gets fired, or does he get fired like well after all this is over?
He gets fired the same year, 1968, which would be the first set of murders happened in 1968. Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards.
Okay.
They were killed in
Yeah, I don't know.
1968.
It just seems like he could have been like pissed about losing his job and his way to be creepy. Also, I think it's interesting that he never like sexually assaulted any of his victims, and that almost seems to make sense to me if he's not interested in adults.
I could see that. That's true. I hadn't thought
But
about it from
also at
that
the same
perspective.
time, like maybe that's works against him being like matching because wouldn't he have just assaulted children and killed children?
That's what I
I
think
see it going
when I
both
think about
ways.
it.
Like it's kind of weird. So
Like
I don't
why
know.
yeah, why target like teenagers basically, because that seems like the majority of his murders were teenagers. Like why pick those people? Wouldn't it
And
have been
couples.
easier? Yeah, and like specifically couples. Like wouldn't it have been easier to get young women alone? That's typically the serial killer modus operandi, right? Like they just like go for vulnerable women who are by themselves. Like wouldn't it
Yeah.
have been easier to do that than to go for couples? Like he was specifically going for two people at once.
Yeah.
It just seems odd.
Yeah.
But I do
It
think
is. It's
like
really weird.
the kid connection is a thing like that I've thought about. It almost seems like, I don't know, I don't want to say juvenile, all this stuff, but it kind of does at the same time. Like I'm sure it was an adult who was doing this, but as I was researching this case, I was like, was this like some sort of teenager who was just like angry at the world and angry at like all these couples were, most of them were in high school. There was only one that was in college. And
Mm-hmm.
like it just seems odd to target high school couples that are just out parking for the night. You know what I mean? Just a
The
weird
only reason
thing.
that I would say that it couldn't be is just because the eyewitnesses, like none of them matched up with a teenager.
No. Yeah.
They're all a
So,
well. But maybe it's like one of those people who, you know, I mean, there are people that never grow past high school. Like they have some kind of a terrible experience in high school that kind of shapes them into somebody that can't move past that. You know, I could see that being the case. Like he was bullied in high school or something, and so now that's his MO, is like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I could see it. I could see that. I don't know. I don't know. It's just one of those, this is one of those cases that just it's like haunted society. People are so invested in figuring out who this is because it doesn't make sense that there was just so much weird stuff. Like he's antagonizing police and he's so public and like out there and not hiding at all, and yet police cannot get a beat on him. They have no idea who he is or where he's at. And I think it's just kind of like he's created this like weird serial killer legacy because people are just so fascinated by what he did. And unfortunately, we'll probably never know who he was. He's probably dead at this
No,
point.
no, he's got to be.
So,
That was like 60 years ago, almost.
yeah, unless he was a teenager, then yeah, which we
Yeah,
don't think he was based on all the descriptions and stuff. So,
yeah.
interesting case,
See,
super
that is a
horrible,
wild case.
but
I don't super remember that one. I think I've heard it before, but it's not. I was about to say it's fun to hear the details. It's not fun, but it is like interesting to ponder on who could have, like, who would have done that and why do it that way. I don't know.
yeah, the motive is baffling. There's just no motive. Like he just seemed to just
Yeah.
like, I want to kill people. The
I mean,
end.
that's what
That's it.
serial killers do, but it's weird because most of them like to stay under the radar so they can keep killing people.
Yeah, and
So,
this guy seemed to have almost the opposite. Like he was like, I catch me if you can.
yeah,
But all
interesting.
right, well, that's the
Crazy.
Zodiac Killer.
There's the Zodiac.
Our first serial killer covered here on For Criming Out Loud.
There you have it,
Great
folks.
stuff. Until next week, you should follow us on social media. We'd love to hear your guys' recommendations on what we should cover next or things you'd be interested in hearing about. Email us at forcrimingoutloud@gmail.com. Send us messages on social media. We're on Instagram at forcrimingoutloud_podcast. We're on Twitter at crimingoutloud. Just send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. And if not, we'll talk to you next week. Bye.